Hi, welcome back to Open Hand Farm. I'm so glad you're here. Today I'm going to do a job that I've been wanting to do for a month or so, and I'm finally going to get it done. Last year I canned black beans for the first time, and I used a recipe where you put chipotle peppers in with them. I am not a spicy eater person, but chipotle, I absolutely love that smoky flavor that the chipotle pepper adds. I bought beans from Azure Standard, and I have used some of them for just eating, but when you cook them to just eat them, they're not near as good as if you can them with all of these spices in them. So today we're going to can some black beans and prepare to can some red beans. Let's get to it. I wanted to show you how I store my black beans. My oats bucket has just a normal lid on it. These lids are called gamma lids, and they have a frame that goes on the bucket here, and then this part of the lid screws on, so you don't have to pry the lid off all the time. That can be really annoying. I also wanted to show you that in my beans I keep some bay leaves, and that helps just to deter bugs. Okay, we're going to close these up so that I don't chance getting any moisture in there. I did not soak my black beans overnight. Instead, I measured them out, put them in a pan, covered them with water, and brought them to a boil. After 3 minutes, I turned them off, and I have let them sit for about 2 hours. They are somewhat rehydrated. They're just not cooked like you would if you were going to eat them. For the red beans, since I will not can them until tomorrow, I went ahead and put them in a bowl and covered them with water, and I'm going to soak them overnight, and I will probably can them tomorrow afternoon. Because the beans are hot and we're going to pack them hot, I had to heat up my jars. So they are in here ready to go. I wasn't sure how many to do, so I just filled them in because I am doing a double recipe. I know that shocks you. A double recipe. Always do a double recipe if you can and if you have time. We're going to leave those in there to stay warm until we're ready for them while we set everything else up. Okay, I've had to get a few more things ready before we get the canning process going. I have a pot of boiling water that I just took off the stove. I've got my beans that are still very warm to the touch, so I'm not going to worry about heating them up. I have chopped up cilantro, my chipotle peppers, some canning salt, lime juice, and my rings. I also have my canning tools. This will help me put the beans and everything else in the jars easily. This will help me get my jars in and out of the hot boiling water so that I don't burn myself. And this will help me measure my headspace, the space that I leave empty at the top of the jar, as well as help me get the air bubbles out before I close the jar up. And over on this side of the kitchen, I have my pressure canner with about 3 inches of water in it. I'm also going to add a splash of distilled vinegar, and that will help keep the jars from getting cloudy. Here's 2 jars, but this one is cloudy in comparison to this clear one. And this is what happens if you don't put a little bit of vinegar in your water. The jar is still fine and can be used. It just doesn't look as pretty. I'm getting this water heated up, and then I'm going to fill my warm jars with warm beans, hot water, and put them in the hot water bath. Now you're going to be surprised, but this is called hot packing. If I were to have something cold, put in cold jars. Don't start my water yet. Put my cold jars in the cold water and then turn on the heat. That's called you guessed it, raw packing or cold packing. I have 14 jars out here because I believe I can fit 7 on each layer of my pressure canner. The first thing we need to do is add our beans. First of all, I need to tell you, this is our headspace, this up here. And this is a measure for it. It has numbers here. I know you can't see them, but we want 1.5 inches of headspace when we put our beans in. So this is 1 inch, which is usually to this first rung on the jar. So I'm going to fill our beans to about here. I'm going to fill the jar with the beans until I think I have about the right headspace. Now, this does get air in it, so if you use this and kind of poke through the beans, that will kind of settle them down, and you can see we're about right here. So that's where I'm going to stop. I have found that instead of me having to guess with each jar as I'm putting it in, I like to fill one the way I want it, dump the beans into a measuring cup, and then I know that's how many beans need to go in the jar. And I don't have to worry about overfilling or paying really close attention. All of the jars have beans in them now, so I'm going to add the other ingredients before I add the hot water, because the other ingredients will take up space in the jar also. Okay, for each jar we're going to add salt. I'm just going to pour some of this in a bowl so I don't have to keep going in and out of the box. All right, 1/2 teaspoon of salt. You do not have to stir these in, because while they are in the pressure canner, they will bubble up and boil, and everything will move around in that jar. No problem. If you don't want to add salt, you do not have to. Then we need a tablespoon of fresh cilantro. I'm just going to kind of grab some and throw it in. We have our cilantro. Now we need 1 tablespoon of lime juice. If you wanted to use fresh limes, go for it. Okay, now we're going to add a fresh garlic clove. Some of these are kind of small. I might add 2. I actually grew these in my garden last year. And now my favorite part, the chipotle pepper. The recipe calls for 1 per jar, but the last time I made them, I was a little nervous to add 1 per jar. So I only added 1/2 of 1. This time, I'm not gonna hold back. Trying to decide what is juice and what is chipotle. Whoa, do I have enough exactly? I don't know if I have a pepper in here. I think it's just the juice. I'm just gonna do that because I don't want to open a whole new can. All right, I think that'll be great. The jars look so pretty with all the color in them. They will not look colorful like this when you take them out. That black bean juice definitely colors things. Now we're going to add the water. What we're going to do is fill it up to 1 inch headspace, which we talked about earlier is up to the rim of the jar. And this is hot water going onto our hot beans. Okay, I put enough water in for there to be 1 inch headspace, but now I have to go in and make sure there weren't any air bubbles because we don't want air pockets in there. It will not cook evenly, and sometimes that opens up space for more water. Okay, some of these needs more. Before we put our lids on, we need to take a rag or a paper towel that has vinegar on it to wipe off the top of our jars. If it got any oil or anything on it, we want that cleaned off. We're getting close. Now we can add our lids. These lids do not have to be boiled and heated because they will get plenty of boiling and heating inside the pressure canner. If you were doing water bath canning, you would want to have these in some boiling water to help soften the ring so that they seal very nicely. Now we're going to put rings on them, and we're not going to like use our whole hand and tighten them as tight as we can. Just kind of finger tight there. I just got it on there and then use my fingers to turn it one more time. They all have rings. Now we're going to put them in the canner. I'm just going to place them in here. You want to be sure not to hit the side of your canner or bump them when you put them inside. Now, because I'm using pint jars instead of quart jars, they are short enough that I can add a tray on top of them and add another ring so I can get my 14 jars in there. Now it's time to put the lid on. After it starts pressurizing, you don't want to move it. Now we have to let the heat build until steam starts coming out this hole. So that's going to take a little bit. So the steam has started coming out of this little vent pipe on the top. And when that starts happening, you set the timer for 10 minutes. Okay, our timer went off, so we're gonna set our jiggler on top of the steam that's coming out. The next thing that's gonna happen is this little guy is gonna rock and roll until he has enough pressure to pop into place. And at that point, the pressure on the wheel will start. And I'm going to let this pressure build up to 11 pounds, and I'm going to maintain that 11 pounds for 75 minutes. Our time has passed. I wanted to show you what the canner looks like while it's under pressure. And it is a little bit over 11, and that's fine. You just don't want it to go under the amount of pressure that you're supposed to have it at. So now I'm going to turn off the heat, and the pressure gauge will go down to 0, and this little guy here will drop down and not be locked into place anymore. And when that happens, then we can take the little weight off and wait 10 minutes and then open the lid. Okay, we got them out of the canner. I'm always afraid, not gonna lie, that there's gonna be broken jars or something's gonna be wrong, but they look beautiful. If you listen, you might be able to hear some of them popping, which indicates the seal is tight. I decided to go ahead and show you the red beans that I'm turning into chili beans. I was supposed to put them in quart-sized jars, but I decided I wanted to stick with the pint size. So when I add my spices, I'll just cut them in half so that they'll fill the pint jar instead of a quart-sized jar. So what I have to put in them is some chili powder. The original recipe calls for 2 tablespoons, so I'm just putting 1 tablespoon in. I've never canned chili beans. The recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of paprika, but I've decided to replace that paprika with a chipotle chili powder because I think I made it very clear earlier. I really like the smoky taste of chipotle. So I'm going to put just 1/4 of a teaspoon in here. Then we have cumin. The recipe for the rest of these items calls for 1 teaspoon for a quart jar. So I'm doing 1/2 of a teaspoon for a pint jar. This cumin smells so good. Now we have onion powder and garlic powder. You could put fresh onion and fresh garlic in here, but my family isn't a big fan of chunks, and salt. And again, you don't have to put the salt in there if you're on a salt-free diet or trying to cut back. Now we add our water to top them off. Here's what they look like up close with all the powders in them. And you can see the 2/3 full. I will say yesterday my beans were probably a little bit too full because after they came out and cooled, you can see there's no liquid in the top of them. Now that won't hurt it, but I kind of like having a little bit of liquid when I open them. And we're filling these the same as we did yesterday. 1-inch headspace. These smell amazing. I am so excited to try them. Alrighty. I'm gonna get these canned up and I'll show you what they look like when they come out. These are the black beans that we canned, and they have been sitting for 24 hours now, which means they are ready to put away. When you take the jars out and they start cooling, they do a ping noise. What happens is that this lid is dipping down. Like a normal lid has kind of a little raised spot on it, and that little spot is being sucked down by the pressure and the heat to seal. So you take the rings off, and what happened to me is I could look at the lids kind of from an angle, and I could see that I had one lid that was still kind of raised in the middle. So I took the ring off of it, and sure enough, that lid just came right off. So I put a regular lid on it, and I put it in the refrigerator because this would not be healthy if you stuck it on a shelf. It would go bad. Be sure and remove your rings. That way you can keep an eye on them instead of thinking they are sealed. Now that they are cooled and we have the rings off, wipe the jars down because they get a little messy in there. Sometimes some of the liquid comes out. You also want to label them. So after these lids dry, I will label them. The chili beans are ready. While I'm working here, I want you to listen for pinging, which is the closing of the lid, the suction. You don't want to ever put these out on a spot that is like extra cold or where there's going to be a cold breeze because it could definitely crack these jars. They are so hot. Like they're bubbling inside, and they will continue bubbling inside for hours. That's how hot they are. Let's listen to see. Oh, I see 10, I think, that have already lost their little button.